But the biggest evolutionary leap was still to come, and that was the shift from a cabin siege to a medieval war. Every movie monster has an origin story or a birthplace, and for the Deadites, that birthplace is a small, unassuming cabin in the woods of Morristown, Tennessee. But the cabin itself is only half the story. The true origin of this evil is less a movie set and more of a mindset. It is the sheer, unfiltered audacity of a group of young friends who had no money and no permission and no real idea what they were doing. But what they did have was a singular vision of what Sam Raimi called the ultimate experience in grueling terror. Happening, folks. Today, in preparation for next month's release of Evil Dead Burn, I'm going to be taking you through the evolution of the entire Evil Dead franchise with particular focus on the evolution of the Deadites themselves. And at the end of the video, I'm going to give you a really quick breakdown of everything I saw in the Evil Dead Burn trailers. But before we break down the actual evil itself, we're going to take a look at the environment that helped create it. The production of 1981's The Evil Dead was no Hollywood operation. It was more like guerrilla warfare being waged by an independent filmmaker who was making everything up as he went along. For example, the legendary shaky cam was not a style choice. It was Sam Raimi chasing his friends through the woods with a camera bolted to a 2x4. And all that fake blood was a mixture of Caro syrup and coffee and food coloring that stained everybody's skin for days. The entire movie was built on sweat and ingenuity and a borderline insane level of commitment to Sam Raimi's singular vision. And that entire singular vision kicked off with a handful of mysterious words from an incantation played back on a Panasonic reel-to-reel tape recorder. This is about as close as I can get to this lens. You can see I don't have any earpieces in to cheat. This is from memory, unedited. Tatra, Hamistrobin, Hazarta, Dantir, Manov, Mansizaun, Hazanzobar, Sumundaropsa, Darhis Hekur, Dunsdarosa. Hit the like button. Oh, I nearly forgot. Everyone's favorite. Kanda. 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 Fuck. But for all of its glaring rough edges, The Evil Dead introduced something genuinely new to horror at the time. It wasn't yet another slasher with a new mask or a vampire that could double as a runway model. It was a formless, invasive evil with no name and no face and no motivation beyond inflicting total and utter chaos. We're going to start by talking about the Deadites as they first appeared, because in 1981 they hadn't even been named yet. The word Deadite is not uttered in the film. The possessed aren't warriors of evil at this stage. They're basically just puppets or a vessel for a hive mind of giggling sadistic cruelty. And the possessions at this stage served only one purpose: complete violation. This first installment is where the Deadites' original mission statement is written, and it's brutal. The evil doesn't enter through a door, doesn't accept an invitation. It violates the natural world and the human body on a cellular level. The forest itself is the antagonist. The tree branches are its fingers and the vines are its inescapable grip. And before a single word of the Necronomicon is spoken, the evil is already there, watching and waiting. Casual viewers mistakenly believe the book summons the evil, but it doesn't. It simply designates who the evil gets to play with. And then comes the voice, that childlike, taunting, sing-song sadism. We're gonna get you, we're gonna get you, not another peep, time to go to sleep. And this isn't a threat, it's a game the Deadites are playing. In their original form, they are not ethereal generals or tacticians. They are wicked children pulling the wings off of flies. The book points them at Ash and his friends, and the Deadites just fuck with them. They mimic their voices, and they mock their pleas for help, all while they're giggling maniacally in the dark. The horror isn't that they want to kill you, it's that they want to hurt you really badly. And they have all the time in the world to do it because you aren't going anywhere. The physicality is also crucial to document. The 1981 Deadite is decomposition incarnate. The whiteout contact lenses, which were excruciatingly painful for the actors to wear, turned their eyes into blank, milky voids. The foam latex and putty makeup cracked and wept fluid under the hot lights, creating the unintended but perfect illusion of a body rotting in real time. There's no armor here, there's no medieval aesthetic. It's just flesh, breaking down and coming away from the bone. This is a monster that wears you like a cheap suit until all your stitching comes undone. And what makes 1981's Deadite so distinct in an evolutionary sense, and the best version of a Deadite in my opinion, is very simple. It has no identity. There is no Henrietta, there's no bad Ash. The possessed are an undifferentiated collective, and nothing more. Cheryl is not a unique demon with a distinct personality any more than she is a spoiled, soured version of her previous self the way we will see in later movies. She is just the mouth the evil is using at that moment, and that lack of identity is terrifying all by itself. 6 years later, and everything changes. And I mean everything. Sam and Bruce and Bob Tappert went back to the cabin with a bigger budget, a somewhat revised vision, and a radical idea. What if the horror was also hilarious? Not a parody or a spoof, but a genuinely terrifying, blood-drenched, Three Stooges-inspired splat-stick nightmare. Evil Dead 2 isn't just a sequel. It's a reinvention so bold and so confident it would retroactively define what the series would eventually become. Right, let's address the elephant in the cabin. The first 10 minutes of Evil Dead 2 are essentially a remake of the first film. It's a condensed, reshot, slightly retconned version that strips away all of the other characters and leaves Ash and his girlfriend Linda by themselves, until Ash is whisked away to a new nightmare on his own. Why? Because rights issues and legal necessities. But necessity is the mother of all invention, and these restrictions forced Sam Raimi into doing something brilliant in response. He took his story about a group of friends in a cabin and he turned it into a one-man show about a man losing his mind. It is a beautiful symphony of sadistic suffering, and Bruce Campbell conducts every note with his chin. This foundational shift from ensemble cast to solo act forced the Deadites to evolve. They couldn't just be a formless, giggling entity anymore. They needed a sparring partner, and they needed personality. And so, allow me to introduce Henrietta. Henrietta is the first Deadite with a full, recognizable persona. She is not just a puppet, she is a glutton, and a mockery of motherhood. She doesn't just taunt Ash with random cruelty, she uses targeted, personal, psychological barbs. She makes jokes, and she's having fun, and as a Deadite, she has evolved from a sadistic child to a theatrical showman, and the entire cabin has become her stage. And then there's the laughing room, which to me is one of the greatest sequences in horror history. The evil stops trying to physically hurt Ash for just a minute, and it launches a coordinated psychological assault. Every object in the room, from the furniture to the lamps and the taxidermy, all erupt in mocking laughter. The Deadite isn't just possessing bodies anymore, it's possessing the environment too. It is weaponizing reality itself, and the message is clear. We could kill you, Ash, but first, we're gonna make you lose your mind. This is a strategic evolution. The evil now understands narrative, and it understands despair, and they're only offering Ash one way out of it. But Ash doesn't want to join them, so he adapts, and he mutilates himself, and in doing so, he morphs into the icon we all know and love today. From his chainsaw hand, to his boomstick, to his trademark one-liners, Evil Dead 2 marks the moment the franchise finds its real soul. And that soul is a man covered in blood and screaming and refusing to ever join them. The Deadites pushed him to the brink, but he pushed back harder. And just like that, the cabin went from being a prison to being a launch pad, not just out the back door, but out of the century. Ash's refusal to join the laughter and to give in to the psychological siege literally ripped a hole in time. So, the evil doesn't just lose a victim, it's lost its star player. And for the Deadites, That meant their game was about to change forever too. And so, these are the Cabin years, from a formless snickering cruelty to a personality-driven performer. Between these two films, it's the same cabin, and the same book, and the same unshakable commitment to pushing the boundaries of what a movie monster can actually be, but with two very different movie monsters. But the biggest evolutionary leap was still to come, and that was the shift from a cabin siege to a medieval war. Where were we? Army of Darkness, the medieval expansion. Let's dig down into that, shall we? If Evil Dead 2 asked, what if horror was also comedy? Then Army of Darkness asked a far more dangerous question. What if we just left? What if we burned the cabin to the ground and threw our hero into a time portal and made it a full-blown fantasy epic? The answer was a box office disappointment that went on to become one of the most beloved cult classics of all time. But for our purposes, the question is much simpler. What did leaving the cabin do to the Deadites? With Army of Darkness, the franchise stopped being a horror series and started being a horror, epic, fantasy, adventure, comedy, opera, documentary, western. The boys took the splat-stick energy from Evil Dead 2 and they blew it up to a blockbuster scale. And the Deadites, as if responding to their newfound environment, adapted accordingly. They went from cabin-bound predators to occupying, invading army. Let's start with Ash himself. By 1992, the transformation was complete. He was no longer the sniveling, suffering protagonist of the first two films. He is now a full-blown action hero, complete with a 7-inch action figure. He's an arrogant, swaggering, loudmouth braggart who stumbles into the role of prophesied savior completely by accident. This version of Ash, the S-Mart housewares employee who gets sucked through time, is the version that would define the Ash character for the next 3 decades. And that meant the Deadites had to evolve to keep up with him. The key evolutionary leap in Army of Darkness is hierarchy. The Deadites are no longer a hive mind of cackling puppets. They are an organized military force with an established chain of command. And at the top of that chain is this fucking guy. And this progression represents a deceptively massive shift for the franchise because the evil is no longer just possessing random bodies, it is creating a dark reflection of our hero. It's almost like whoever's writing this is starting to learn how to write. And this dark reflection understands Ash well enough to weaponize his voice and his face and his own arrogance against him. And then there's the book itself. In the first 2 films, the Necronomicon Ex Mortis was just a plot device or a spooky book down in the cellar. But in Army of Darkness, the book is a character. It has a face, and it has teeth, and it plays a role in the plot structure. And this is the moment the franchise explicitly confirms what we'd always suspected. The book isn't just a repository of evil spells, it is the source, it is the battery, it is the brain that powers everything. And the Deadites are not independent entities, they are extensions of this single ancient malevolent intelligence. The army serves the book, and Bad Ash serves the book, and everything serves the book. And the foot soldiers of the Deadite army itself is where the physicality evolves in a fascinating direction. The 1981 Deadite was basically a rotting corpse, and the 1987 Deadite was essentially a caricature of that rotting corpse. But 1992's Deadite is a skeletal warrior paying some obvious respects to 1958's The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. It's no longer just about the horrors of the human body breaking down. Now, we also have the spectacle of a skeletal army storming the castle walls. And for the first time, the Deadite's no longer just a threat to a cabin or even a kingdom. It's become a potential threat to the entire world. The scope has shifted from intimate to epic. After 1992's Army of Darkness, the franchise went kinda quiet. There were no TV shows and there were no movies, but the Deadite hadn't died. It was just incubating. During that period, the franchise was quietly infecting comic books and video games, and there was even a stage musical that sprayed audience members with fake blood. The franchise's pilot light never had a chance to go out because we fans were keeping the book open the entire time. And when the franchise finally did return in 2013, it didn't just pick up where things had left off. It went right back to the beginning, but it brought something new with it too. Something even crueler. In 2013, a young director named Fede Alvarez was handed the keys to the cabin, and his mission was to reboot the franchise for a new generation. His approach was to strip away the comedy and all the one-liners. Ash Williams wasn't even there. That groovy cameo never counted to me. The movie attempted to return to the 1981 original's vision of unrelenting, grueling terror. But then, it pushed things even further. The result was a film that divided fans. Personally, I liked it as a horror, but not as an Evil Dead horror. But when it's examined objectively, Alvarez's film represents one of the most significant evolutionary leaps in the Deadites' history. Let's be clear about something. The 2013 Evil Dead is not a remake in any traditional sense, but it does exist within the same universe as the original movies. Bruce and Sam did produce it, and our favorite Oldsmobile from the original movies is rusting in the background. 2013 Evil Dead is a continuation of the story and a new chapter in the same book, but the Deadites from 2013 are unlike anything we've experienced before, because these Deadites have to follow rules. Lots and lots of rules. The film opens with a new piece of lore, the Abomination Doctrine. When a Deadite possesses a living soul, there is a ritual of purification and fire and dismemberment and finally burial. But if the ritual fails and the abomination is not cleansed, 5 souls must be taken in its place. This is not the chaotic, giggling evil of the cabin. This is a covenant. It is a contract of sorts. It's a kind of fundamentalist Old Testament logic that transforms the Deadite from a sadistic predator into an agent of cosmic law. The evil isn't just cruel anymore, it's also kind of righteous. And then there's the film's protagonist, Mia, played perfectly by Jane Levy. Mia is at the cabin for the weekend to quit heroin cold turkey, because Fede Alvarez seems to think you can do something like that in a weekend. These Deadites look very different, and they are focused on something new. Intimacy. They don't just possess Mia, they weaponize her addiction against her. If 1981's Deadites were formless cruelty, 2013's are more of a surgical scalpel, and they know exactly where to slice. The physicality of the 2013 Deadite deserves some special attention. This is not decomposition for spectacle, it is self-mutilation as a weapon. The possessed characters destroy their own bodies with a terrifying, gleeful efficiency. They use shards of glass from a mirror and a nail gun. There's an electric carving knife slowly and deliberately guided through an arm. There's no splat stick here, and there's definitely no Three Stooges. Every wound is personal, every act of violence is a desecration. The Deadite isn't just wearing the bodies anymore, they're punishing them. Mia barely survives the ordeal, but her victory is not Ash Williams' victory. There is no Hail to the King, and there is no Groovy, because I don't count the cameo. She crawls across the blood-soaked earth covered in guts and gore, having just lost everyone she loves and her own arm. The abomination is destroyed at the end, but the covenant itself is only barely fulfilled. By the end of the story, the book and the evil are very much still alive, but 2013's Evil Dead proves definitively that Deadites can be very scary without Ash Williams. It turns out they only need pain to thrive, and as Mia learns over the course of this movie, pain is very much in abundance. No matter what you thought of it, in a lot of ways, the 2013 film is the purest expression of 1981's original mission statement as the ultimate experience in grueling terror. But it also represents a big fork in the evolutionary road of the Deadites. At this point, the Deadites could have gone one of two directions. They could have gone back to Ash and the comedy and the splat stick, or they could have dug deeper into the darkness. As it turns out, Fede Alvarez chose the latter, and therein lies the film's divided reception. For over 30 years, the Deadites were contained by geography, between a cabin in Tennessee and a castle in the Middle Ages. The book itself was always eventually found and then inevitably lost again. But something changed again. The book didn't stay lost. It was found in a bank vault under a high-rise in the middle of a New Zealand city that's meant to be in America. And for the first time in the franchise's history, the cabin and the woods were completely gone. Well, mostly gone. And the evil had finally come to roost in the heart of the modern world. By 2023, the Evil Dead franchise had spent 40 years in the woods. The cabin was its prison and its playground, and the isolated location was its greatest weapon. But isolation, by definition, is always going to limit your scale. A Deadite in a cabin can terrify 5 people. A Deadite in a city The question Evil Dead Rise asked was simple and terrifying. What happens when the book leaves the woods and uses your elevator to arrive at your front door? In my opinion, Evil Dead Rise, directed by Lee Cronin, is the most important film in this franchise since the original. Not because it's the scariest or because it's the best, but because it solves a problem the franchise had been wrestling with for ages. That being, how do you get the Necronomicon out of the cabin without breaking the logic of the Evil Dead universe? And Cronin's answer was elegant. You don't move the book, you just reveal the book was never bound to the cabin in the first place. Duh. The film opens with what we think is familiar territory. There is a cabin and a lake and a copy of Wuthering Heights, followed by a gruesome possession and a title card that reads, "One day earlier." We are back in Evil Dead territory and we know the rules. But then it cuts to a city and an apartment building and a young, clean-cut, modern family, right down to the single mother. The cabin was never the main event, it was the prologue. When the story starts, the evil has already escaped. It's been sleeping under a parking garage sealed in a bank vault, waiting for someone to open the wrong door. This is the decoupling. This is the moment the franchise severs its own rotting umbilical cord. The Necronomicon is no longer a cottage-specific artifact. It's an archaeological threat, and it's been buried under your apartment this whole time. The book itself was never the prison. The cabin was. And now that the book is loose in a population center, the Deadites have a new environment to operate in and new hosts to operate on. And of course, that provides them with new opportunities. The high-rise apartment building acts like a kind of vertical petri dish. Every floor is a new room, and every apartment is a new cage. And within that cage, the family has no idea what they've just put on their turntable. I think the genius in Evil Dead Rise is that it really gets the assignment. The core strength of this franchise has never been the woods. It's always been the personal violation. The cabin worked because it trapped people who loved each other in a very small space with an evil that knew exactly how to hurt them. And Lee Cronin simply transplanted that intimacy into a high-rise apartment. The cabin's become the family now, and the collapsed staircase becomes the woods outside that won't let you leave. And Ellie, the mother, the protector, and the emotional core of this family unit, is the first to fall. And she falls pretty hard. Now let's talk about the Marauder. This is the name Lee Cronin gave to his Deadite, and it is a crucial part of our evolutionary data. If 1981's Deadite was a rotting puppet, and 1987's was a theatrical showman, and 2013's was a self-mutilating fundamentalist, 2023's Deadite is a hunter. It is a predator stalking its own family through a confined space, and its physicality is entirely new too. According to Lee Cronin, the jerking, lurching, head-whipping movements were inspired by Samara from The Ring. And that shift creates a Deadite that is less about decomposition and more about predatory efficiency. This evil isn't just inhabiting Ellie's body, it is weaponizing her motherly instincts and her children's love against them. No matter what you thought of Evil Dead Rise, that is pretty hardcore. And that is the key to the Marauder's effectiveness. The Deadite has always understood psychological torture, but in Rise, the torture is specifically maternal. Ellie doesn't just attack her children, she corrupts the very concept of motherhood. She mocks her daughter's fear, and she weaponizes her youngest daughter's trust.
Oh, Mommy's with the maggots now.
That is not just a gross line of dialogue, it's a perversion of the safest sentence a child can ever say. The Deadite has evolved to understand that the most profound horror is not the violation of a body, it's the corruption of a loving bond. And in the absence of Ash Williams again, another new hero emerges called Beth. She is the aunt and a reluctant protector that never asked for any of this, and her arc is subtle but crucial. She starts the film completely disconnected and is attempting to run away from her own life. But she ends the story covered in blood, wielding a chainsaw and protecting a child she has just vowed to raise as her own. This franchise has always stuck to one thing fundamentally. The Deadites are not defeated by muscles. They are defeated by love. Ash fought for himself, and then he fought for his friends. Mia ended up fighting for her brother. Beth ends up fighting for a child that's not even hers. When the Deadites corrupt a family, the hero always reforges it. Well, whatever's left of it. And then, in the film's final act, we witness something unprecedented. The Deadite attempts to evolve mid-film. The possessed bodies of Ellie, Danny, and Bridget merge into a single towering abomination, a rat king of corpses. This is not the abomination of 2013 born from a failed ritual. This is a deliberate amalgamation. The evil is experimenting. It is trying to combine its vessels into a more efficient form. Now, it fails. Beth and Cassie tear it apart, but the attempt is the point. The Deadite's no longer content with one body and one victim and one family. It wants more. It wants to become something newer and bigger. For the first time, it has agency. Evil Dead Rise ends with a double-edged victory, just like all the other movies in the franchise. The building is ruined, the family is totally destroyed, but Beth and Cassie survive. They walk off together into the dawn of a world that is about to find out exactly what a Deadite really is. And this confirms the cabin is totally unnecessary, because the book can go anywhere it wants to now. Like Dead Rocky Dennis. I had to make one of my jokes. This video is huge! And with Evil Dead Rise, the franchise completes a 40-year journey from the woods to the city and from isolation to population. From a formless giggling cruelty to a hunting, merging, experimenting predator. The Deadites have proved they can adapt to any environment and corrupt any bond and weaponize any kind of relationship. But what happens when they stop experimenting and start winning? But the Deadites' urban experiment was not its only 21st century evolution. While the 2013 and 2023 films were pushing the horror into darker, more intimate territory, something else was happening on the small screen. Ash Williams was back. He was older and cruder somehow, and now he's facing a Deadite plague that had finally, irreversibly gone public. For over 2 decades, fans like me were asking one question: when's Ash coming back? We got comics and video games and a stage musical where the front row was referred to as the splatter zone, but Bruce Campbell had hung up his chainsaw. Or so we thought. But then in 2015, the Evil Dead franchise did something completely unprecedented. It didn't return to theaters, it went to television. And it brought Ash Williams back for one last glorious, blood-soaked ride off into the sunset. Ash vs. Evil Dead ran for 3 short seasons on Starz, and it is, in my opinion, the single greatest gift this franchise ever gave its fans. It's not just a continuation, it's more like a victory lap or a love letter written in Caro syrup and latex. But for our evolutionary analysis, the show is so much more. It is the final definitive proof that the Deadites can no longer be contained. They're now out, and they are everywhere, and they're having the time of their fucking lives. The show picks up 30 years after Army of Darkness. Ash is much worse for wear. He is living in a trailer, he's lying about his past, and he's generally failing at life. But he is still, undeniably, our Ash. He's still brandishing his boomstick and his chin, and when a new generation of Deadite mayhem erupts, sparked, of course, by Ash getting high and reading from the Necronomicon to impress a woman, he's forced back into action alongside 2 younger, far more competent sidekicks, in Pablo and Kelly. And the dynamic is perfect. Ash is the washed-up legend, Pablo is the true believer, and Kelly is the angry pragmatist. And together, they face a Deadite plague that's not even attempting to hide in the shadows. And this is where our evolutionary data gets really interesting. The television Deadites are the most opportunistic, versatile version of the creatures we've ever seen. They can possess anything, from a doll to an entire morgue, to even a human colon. The show takes the logic of the franchise to its most absurd and extreme conclusion. If the evil can possess organic matter and the world is full of organic matter, then the whole world is a potential Deadite. If the cabin was a limitation and the city was a test run, the TV series is proof of concept. The Deadites can go anywhere, be anything, and do whatever the hell they want. But the show isn't just a comedy. Underneath the splat stick and the one-liners, there is a genuine melancholy. Ash is not a young man anymore. He's lost decades and he's lost friends. And he's lost himself in a haze of denial and cheap beer. And so, these Deadites aren't just threatening his life, they are threatening his legacy. In the 3rd and final season, we are introduced to Ash's daughter, Brandy. She forces Ash to confront something he's been shrugging off his entire life: responsibility. The show asks a question the films never had time for, and that's what happens to the hero after the credits roll. And the answer for Ash is that he keeps fighting, because that's all he knows how to do. And this version of the Deadites happens to be Bruce Campbell's favorite, and I can understand why. Ash Williams is ridiculous in this series as always, but he is also surprisingly and unexpectedly very human. He's a screw-up who keeps on getting back up to fight, and he is a braggart who occasionally, accidentally, tells the truth. This series gave Ash some depth without sacrificing any of his absurdity, and it gave the Deadites their biggest stage yet. And then comes the prom, Season 3's climactic set piece, and for our purposes, it's the single most important scene in the entire series. The Deadite plague erupts at a high school dance, and teenagers scatter, and cell phones capture everything. The footage is streamed and uploaded and shared. For the first time in 40 years, the Deadite is not a legend whispered around a campfire. It is a public catastrophe, and the secret is out. The world knows evil is real, and it has a chainsaw-wielding, boomstick-blasting, deeply inappropriate savior. And this is our evolutionary crescendo. The Deadite has become a viral sensation. They have gone from a rumored urban legend to a trending topic online, and if you think about the sociological implications, they are massive. If the world knows about Deadites, the world will try fighting the Deadites. And if the world tries fighting the Deadites, they will be forced to adapt. Again, and the World War will kick off. And right when the series was picking up steam, it ended on a fucking cliffhanger. With Ash Williams in a post-apocalyptic future facing a world that has clearly lost the war against the Deadite plague. And it's a brutal and unintentionally perfect ending because it keeps the Evil Dead tradition alive. The hero survives, but the world didn't. And as fans, we've been waiting ever since for a resolution that is probably never going to come. Ash vs. Evil Dead is a tragedy wrapped up in a comedy. It's a story about a man who cannot stop fighting in a world that can't stop ending. And this series gave us the most versatile and ravenous and crazy Deadites in the entire franchise. It also left us with a question at the end of that last episode. If Ash Williams couldn't save the world, who can? Unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that, but if the trailer for Evil Dead Burn is anything to go by, let's talk about the end of the world instead. We now have 40 years of data, 5 movies, 3 seasons of a television series, and 1 book. Or 3 books. And all of that leaves us with one question. What's next? Next month, in July 2026, we are getting Evil Dead Burn. It's another chapter in the same book with a new director, Sebastian Vanacek, who was the French filmmaker responsible for the acclaimed creature feature, Infested. There's a new cast and a new setting, and if the trailers are anything to go by, there is also a new scale, which looks quite big. The official synopsis describes it as a Deadite breakout within a secluded family home. And there's fire and lots of panic and an evil plague ripping through each of the family members. So, we're going to do what we've done for every other chapter. Let's set aside the hype and ask the only question left. Based on 40 years of evolution, what is the Deadite about to become? The patterns within this franchise so far have been undeniable. Each new chapter accomplishes 2 things simultaneously. First, it has honored what's come before it, with the book and the words and the practical effects and the intimacy. And second, it has introduced a radical mutation in the Deadites. From formless to personality, from personality to hierarchy, from hierarchy to doctrine, and from doctrine to portability. And then from portability to virality. And so far, the Deadites have never repeated themselves. They have always escalated. And after watching the Evil Dead Burn trailer a few times, here's what I saw in it. The trailer opens with Susan opening a dishwasher full of foreshadowing cutlery. Then Susan leaves the kitchen where she's met by Alice coming in the front door. When Susan asks what's wrong, Joseph arrives looking as disheveled as Alice is. Then a knock at the door leads us into some imagery reminiscent of Jane Levy from Fede Alvarez's 2013 Evil Dead. I believe this recently turned Deadite's name is Thea. She is bleeding and she appears to have been separated from some of her digits. The next shot sees her removing a car headrest from her head. which seems fully appropriate in this universe, and then we hear the modernized version of the Deadite voice along with the modernized version of the Deadite contact lenses. And then we're shown a few track titles. We are accustomed to seeing this sort of thing during sweeping shots of forest floors and parking garages. So the elevation adds a bit of a novelty if nothing else. And then we're taken to William's funeral, followed by an exterior shot of the house featured in all the teaser trailers. And then things get interesting. We are shown a book, but it's not a Necronomicon by our Evil Dead standards. It seems to have been discovered while somebody was turning the trash upside down. Then we're shown Alice leafing through the pages of what seems more like somebody's journal than a Book of the Dead. It looks leather-bound and polished, unlike the typical tomes we're used to seeing bound in flesh and inked in blood. And then, if you freeze the frame and zoom in a bit, you will see the name Nobi amongst the other handwritten scribbles. And if you know your lore, you will know he is none other than Professor Raymond Nobi, a professor of Egyptian mythology and the very person to discover the Necronomicon Ex Mortis. And so, we can probably assume this book belongs to somebody likely researching Nobi's work. And I'm speculating it was Joseph's grandfather, but that's just speculation. There's even a newspaper article referencing the 4 dead bodies found in the burning cabin from Alvarez's 2013 film. And if this is somebody's findings, it's a brilliant method to bring all 3 versions of the book together in a neat and tidy fashion. While this is happening, we hear, "Grandfather believed the devil would return if anyone read from the Book of the Dead." And while I'll be quietly furious if Vanichex decided to retcon half the allure of the Necronomicon by tying it directly to the devil, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt for another 4 weeks. We can probably assume from this clip Alice is the one to unleash the evil in this edition, especially if we reference one of the earliest teaser images from back in April. And then this gentleman exits a car, and we know him as the main antagonist from the ultra-violent, fast-paced teaser clips from a few weeks back. We know he's part of the main family, but what we don't know is how the hell he's driving a car with his Deadite contact lenses in. And then Alice is set upon by Polly, who's the grandmother in the family. We're shown some of the fiery thematic title imagery bathed in a burning orange glow before we see a completely burnt Deadite who appears to ignite anything it comes into contact with. Again, tying back to the film's title. The dialogue then reveals the whole family can be reunited, and given we were at William's funeral 30 seconds ago, we have a fair idea of what the book's intended purpose is probably going to be. Then, I'm sure the title, "Family is the Root of All Evil," has a lot of us reminiscing about our own families so close to Father's Day, or maybe that's just me. And then the posters, "Every Family Has Its Demons" tagline ties some of the themes from Lee Cronin's Evil Dead into this film. And then we're shown Thea losing her fingers in the car prior to busting into the house, but I suppose we'll have to wait for the movie to find out about the headrest. And then Alice gets her Bruce moment, but instead of the trademark chainsaw, Vanichex armed her with a circular saw, which is breaking tradition, but it would give her a bit more reach. Then Grandma chases Alice up over the roof and down into the chimney, where we can safely assume Alice gets the upper hand from the lower ground based on the neck shot. And then, after a fast-moving montage of blood and guts and bar fighting, I am pretty sure we are shown the opening of the film, which appears to be picking up where Evil Dead Rise left off. To me, that looks like Jessica, from the location to the shape of her, right down to the hand movements. This is the only time there's a lake in the trailer, and Rise ended chronologically with Jessica rising up from the water. I think this speaks to Vanichex agreeing to honor some kind of continuity, given Bruce and Sam and Bob have suggested they're going to be cranking out new Evil Dead movies every couple of years going forward. But what do I know? Then there's more respect paid to 2013's movie with a bathroom scene featuring another porcelain beatdown. The final shot features Joseph facing off with Deadite Thea, with him holding an electric carving knife, and you probably know where Vanichex lifted that imagery from. Joseph ends up on his back on the stainless steel foreshadowing from earlier, but given the earlier teasers contained this scene, you can rest assured the old knife in the back didn't take him out. If you're still here, thank you for joining me on this journey from a grainy VHS tape and a wood panel VCR to a burning world that hasn't even arrived yet. I have no idea if Evil Dead Burn is going to be any good. My personal favorite Deadite is Cheryl Williams from The Evil Dead 1981. I don't dislike modern iterations of the Deadites, I just find them less unnerving because they have personalities that are essentially those of the characters after they've taken a handful of grumpy pills. Depending on when you're watching this, if you've seen the Evil Dead Burn trailer, I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments section. If you've seen Evil Dead Burn the movie, I would love for you to do the same. As always, thank you very much for watching my dumb little video. Thank you very much for watching my dumb big video. And until next time, folks.